Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you so much for joining me, Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. Today, I am so happy to have on board our guest, and she is the author of the new book, The Healing Powers of Herbs and Spices, a complete guide to nature's timeless treasures. Cal Orey, who is our guest, is an author and journalist specializing in topics such as health, nutrition, science, and pets. And she has written countless articles for both health and women's magazines about food and their health benefits, as well as home cures. She has appeared in many different venues, such as Newsmax, Women's World, Women's Day, and Men's Fitness. And she has a master's degree in English from San Francisco State University and resides in Northern California. She has a long list of books, including The Healing Powers of Vinegar, Olive Oil, Chocolate, Honey, Coffee, Tea, Superfoods. Boy, these all sound yummy. Essential Oils. And on today's book, we'll be talking about the powers of herbs and spices. So thank you so much for joining us today, Corey.
Hi, how are you?
So what led you from your focus in having a degree in English and writing to doing books on health and healing, in particular natural?
I fell into it. I knew I was always going to be a writer since third grade. I had the gift. And I've always been a health nut, born and raised in California. I started writing about dogs and health in dogs, and then I moved over to cats, and then I moved over to humans. And before I knew it, I was pigeonholed as the health and nutrition author. It just happened. I didn't grow up saying I'm going to be a health, author. I was going to be a dental assistant, but I fell into it. And I'm good at it because I could break down, I have a master's in English, so I could break down studies, full of scientific jargon and break it down so the layperson gets it and wants to get it because it's fun to read. And then by interviewing high-profile people, MDs, PhDs, NDs, it just all comes together. Like I said, I have a way of, with words and explaining health and nutrition to the mainstream audience is what I do. And I must do it well because they keep coming back asking me to write articles and books. So there you go. But I didn't grow up saying I'm going to be a health author. I fell into it. I think what makes my book successful, though, is that I have the gift of storytelling. And so instead of just a dry book, talking about herbs and spices, I weave in anecdotes. And now, during the pandemic, people are hungry, pun intended, for adventurous foods and for nostalgia, which, herbs and spices go back when I was growing up in the 50s and centuries ago. So they're hungry for nostalgia. They're hungry for adventurous foods since we really can't travel as much as normal pre-pandemic times. So the book seems... It's funny, the subhead, Timeless Treasures, this book is timeless. It takes us back to, the 1600s when explorers were looking for priceless herbs and spices, which were used as commodities, to today, where there's actually a surge in spices. Large companies like McCormick, they have seen a huge demand for spices and herbs because we're actually doing so much more home cooking because we're sort of, in California, we're under lockdown. So what else are we supposed to do? And I do prefer home cooking over takeout. anyway, because you can control the ingredients that you use in your food. So there you go.
In your book, The Healing Powers of Herbs and Spices, it's very, beautiful to look at also.
Mm-hmm. It is. I started getting into coffee table book writing, which is fascinating and a new trend. Half beautiful pictures and half text and storytelling. And maybe this was all meant to be. But I think I'm going to be doing my first coffee table book, and I'm very excited. And you are right. It is beautiful, and the people that did the layout, the team. My publisher, Kensington, they did a wonderful job with charts, and a lot of the stories, legends, and anecdotes are in shaded boxes. And in the middle of the book, there's 16 pages of color photos that'll make you hungry, of like pumpkin pie, spicy pumpkin pie, and salmon with lots of fresh herbs, and oh my God, and cheesy bread. That is a killer recipe. Everyone loves that. With cilantro.
So what about, you're talking about spices, and it certainly was, great timing, because when you were writing this book, it must have not been pandemic time yet. And then, that snuck up on us, because I know how long it takes for a book to actually get out from the time that you started. But what is the difference for our audience, or from your perception, between a spice and an herb?
They both come from plants, and I remember when I got the assignment, I asked my editor, should I divide it in two, like some books do, where they go herbs and then part one, spices too. But she said no, because they're all from plants, and she's correct. So I chose the top 22 favorites of mine, and about 75% of those are from the Mediterranean diet. So again, they all come from plants, different parts, the stems, flowers, and so on. They're different textures, as you know. They could be ground, they could be whole. And of course, I tell you what forms can be used in each section of each spice and herb.
So it's really just the difference in use, because the thing is, I'll say this about that. All spices are herbs, but not all herbs are spices.
Correct.
Because spices are, like you said, plant material. The difference, I would say, is about the concept of the use, especially in modern times. When we talk about herbs, very often we're talking about the medicinal component, and when we're talking about spice, it's about a flavoring aspect.
Correct, but they both do. They both do have all the healing compounds in each one, which back in the 1600s during the plague time, which is kind of. Yeah, that's eerie how I talk about, you're right, when I first started this, we were in pre-pandemic. It seems so long ago.
You're right.
And I was talking about the plague and how people would use this, like garlic and vinegars, the Four Thieves formula. It was legend that four thieves were going around robbing people, the dead bodies of, what they had on, the things they had that were worth money. They were robbing people, and people were dumbfounded. Why didn't they get the plague? And it's because supposedly they were using a lot of the herbs and spices and vinegar on their body to stave off getting sick. And as I mention in the book a lot, that all of these 22 herbs and spices, most of them from the Mediterranean countries.
Well, let's talk about some of those, because I have found, having been involved in natural medicine for so many years, because I actually started in 1964, so it's been quite a while, over 50 years, and you're so right that a lot of these things that started out as considered folkloric remedies have now been really studied deeply, and you do talk about studies in your beautiful book, The Healing Power of Herbs and Spices.
True.
So not only do they have ancient traditional use, they also are totally vetted in mainstream science.
True, and I have to say that made my work a lot easier for this book, because some of the other books you mentioned I've done, like vinegar, it was difficult to find hard-hitting studies. But this one, like finding studies and new studies continue to come out on, for instance, garlic were quite easy to find. Just Google it and you'll see new studies are happening all the time, and scientists are actually they look at these under the microscope and see that they have antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, antiviral components in them. And so it's not, a lot of people would poo-poo the things I write about. Oh, there's no proof. This is all anecdotal. But there is hard-hitting proof for these. So you're so correct. I mean, like cayenne, that's cayenne. They use that in creams as an anti-inflammatory, where you could buy over the counter at the store. So there is proof. Some of the ones, again, I said they're from the Mediterranean diet, and this series, the Healing Power series, is based on the Mediterranean diet. It's the top diet in the past 3 years, actually, in the United States.
Well, it's also very, very well vetted in science. But I want to remind our listeners that you are tuned into Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, and my guest today is author Cal Orey, who has a very long list of beautiful books that are available, and you can just find her even on Amazon, put in her name, Cal Orey, they'll all come up. But today we're focusing on her newest book called The Healing Powers of Herbs and Spices. And thank you so much for being our guest today, Cal. So as you were saying, let's talk about that Mediterranean diet, because many of your beautiful and easy to follow recipes in this book would fit into that genre.
Correct. When I did the first book back in 2000, The Healing Powers of Vinegar, it was given to me. It wasn't my idea. They just said, "Do you want to write a book on vinegar?" And the consultant that gave me the idea, he wanted me to address red wine vinegar. He thought back then that resveratrol, which is found in red wine, would be the key that would make the book stand out different and be heart healthy. Yes and no. As I started my research and talked to many scientists, they told me you'd have to drink like gallons of red wine vinegar to get the benefits, the health benefits. But I didn't want to stop the book, so that's how I put it together. Red wine is part of the Mediterranean diet. Olive oil is too, and I kind of put it all together, and it got the pyramid of the Mediterranean diet, the foods chart where it was included, and just went from there and used the foods from the Mediterranean diet.
So what are some of those for our listeners in case they don't?
Yeah, it's a plant-based diet. It's a really wholesome diet. I've been eating it actually since I was a teenager, not knowing what it was called. But it's based on very little meat. I am a vegetarian, but fish, I used to eat it. I just... once you go vegetarian or vegan, it's really hard to go back into meat.
But in terms of the Mediterranean diet, it is not a vegetarian diet, but it's certainly
it's plant-based. It does include fish and poultry, correct, and a little bit of meat, which I do not eat. And I should eat fish, but I don't, very rarely. But that's me. But fish is definitely part of it. You are correct. Fatty fish like salmon, even tuna, but which is high in mercury, but fish and eggs. But when I say plant-based, fruits and vegetables are a big part of it. If you look at the pyramid, they're a big chunk. Fruits and vegetables, and then you go into your nuts, all natural foods, from Mother Earth. Very little sugar, red wine in moderation, water without a doubt. What have I left out? Olive oil is your main fat.
Right, and you have a whole book on olive oil as well. So it's interesting that then the book came out, and very appropriate for this time, because I have to say the entire herbal industry, and in fact, in a larger sense, the nutraceutical industry, herbs, vitamins, and essential oils, they have had their banner year ever. And I think that has to do with people searching out other ways they can support their immune system and also fight invading microorganisms. Simultaneously, the FDA is monitoring anyone who especially publishes something that says, let's say, that a particular herb would be effective against viruses, and in particular COVID. And they're making it literally illegal to share that information, which is interesting.
Right, you have to be very careful. I noticed that my books, especially the honey book, has done really well. Vinegar was my best-selling book forever. I mean, timeless forever. It's in the 3rd edition, and it has sold, 500,000 copies, translated in 20 languages. Go figure, right? Apple cider vinegar, red wine vinegar, herbal vinegars, fruit vinegars. But I've noticed in the past couple years, guess what? Honey, and especially during COVID challenge, honey is the number one bestseller now. I'm getting the banner on all the bookseller sites online, and Newsmax did pick it up and buy it in bulk. The honey book, because we know it has the compounds, the antioxidants, the antibacterial, antiviral. People use it for sore throats. I just saw a commercial last night on cough medicine with honey. So, but
that's an interesting thing. It's sort of one that commercial. I did see it also. It's a conventional brand. Which is also happening. And that is very much driven by public interest in natural remedies, which fits right into your book, The Healing Power of Herbs and Spices. There's a real desire to find out about that suddenly. And
but they have to be careful. They can't slam on, this is going to fight COVID, and you just can't do that.
Well, you can't say it.
Correct.
But they intimate it, because here's all these people, feeling pretty ill in bed. They're not saying what they might have, but
because in reality it can fight symptoms, but it can't, it can't help cure COVID, but it can help, like if you have a sore throat, and let's say you have a mild case of the flu or COVID, it can help the symptoms, but still you have to be very careful how you phrase it.
That's what it is. You have to be careful about how you say it, but yet it's completely legal in the way you're presenting it as an educational book, because you're not selling any specific product in there. So while you're saying, an herb, you're not saying get this herb. So it's a really great presentation and a way for people to find out more. You have a wonderful A to Z guide that shows us how to use herbs and spices. Remember, again, those words can actually be synonymous. Things that you might use as a spice normally. Let's say you use rosemary as a flavoring agent. That also is a highly medicinal herb. One of the things that rosemary can do that's just so spectacular is, in terms of things like pain and autoimmune disease, rosemary can turn off the kinds of white blood cells that really attack your own body. But at the same time, they don't turn off the white blood cells that fight a microorganism. There is no drug that can do that. But yet rosmarinic acid from rosemary can. It's called a selective immune inhibitor. So it's really spectacular when you get into all the scientific studies that are there.
True. And I was just looking at my list, and I'm surprised rosemary isn't one of the top 22, but it is included. Of course, I include more than 22 in all the recipes. There's more than 50 recipes in this book. It's a health cookbook, and cookbooks are really in demand right now because of the home cooking spike. But I'm looking at the list, and rosemary is not included. It's in alphabetical order, and I see we're going paprika, parsley, saffron, tarragon, thyme. And thyme and rosemary are definitely combined in a lot of dishes, but no, it's not. But I do include the blends. Some of the reviewers have noticed they like the setup that I use for the book. And out of those 22 spices and herbs, what you'll have, at the chapter 17, nutmeg, I start off with nostalgia, how, when I was first introduced personally, I write in first-person narrative, just like I'm talking to you. I write about when I was a child and how I was introduced to nutmeg and a little story, how it affected me as a kid. And then I talk about the roots where nutmeg came from. And then I talk about what's in it, the anti-inflammatory compounds, the antioxidants, the essential oils, all the good stuff that makes it work. Then I talk about the studies and break it down so it's not boring. And then I give you some of the benefits, the health benefits that it can help you with. It may guard against asthma, stomach pain, a kidney detoxifier. And then I give you some safety sound bites because not all herbs and spices are safe for everyone.
Right, and certainly nutmeg is a perfect example because nutmeg also has been abused because it does have psychoactive constituents, which means, if you take enough of it, it can get you high, but it can also be toxic. So
it's funny you say that. That is so true, and I read that, and I do say no more than 1 tablespoon of nutmeg per day is recommended. I know when I make homemade custard, I love that with nutmeg on top. I always think about that. Did I put too much? And then I talk about the different ways you can use it, and then I give a recipe. And most of the recipes, some of them are created by myself, but most of them are from pro chefs. And then we go into the next spice. And then we have the healing highlights. I recap the most important things to glean from each chapter. But it's a nice organization. So, some books are all over the map. This topic, I'm not the first one to write about it or the last, but I think that the organization of the book is very easy to follow. I'm proud of it.
Well, you also have the RDAs, how much, whatever measured actual nutrients might be in it, which is a really nice thing that is not always so easy to find.
That's right, I do have that. I include a lot. It's surprising when I look at this. This book is not small by any means, with all the charts and stories and legends and recipes. I'm wondering where I got the energy to write this puppy up. Because, you see actors being interviewed on TV, and they always say, I never watch myself in the movie. When I received the book, and I received the box of books last week, I never sit down and read the whole book from beginning to end. I just don't. But I always am just so surprised. How did all this information come out of my brain? Because it's like almost 350 pages.
But the way you have it laid out is nice because it talks about both the tradition and the folklore and then also the science in an easy-to-read form, like you said. And, there are some really herbs that, of course, are trending right now because of their antimicrobial properties. And that might be clothed in a way where we're talking about herbs that might be good, let's say, for a cold, or a flu, rather than saying COVID, because, of course, they're the same thing if they're antimicrobial. So what are some of the ones that you point out that are helpful
funny
in that
you
situation?
say that. one of the things about this book that I just adore, and it is my favorite child right now, is garlic. Last year, before the pandemic, I think it was foreshadow of the adventures we've all shared. In December, I went to Alaska to include anecdotes about it in this book. And when I flew up there from California, there was hurricane force winds. We were going to have to divert to Fairbanks. And in hindsight, I was really scared, but it was exciting both. And I did go alone, like I like to travel. But there was so much rough air. Oh, my God. And it was late at night. And I was watching The Lion King to settle me down, and I perforated my eardrum. It was horrific. I mean, the storm was bad. But when I got to my room in this really beautiful hotel, high up so I could see the view, there was fog in Anchorage. I couldn't see all the beautiful mountains. I couldn't go. There was no snow. It was warm. The weather was crazy. But I did order a pizza, room service, with garlic. And I did have a sore throat because, when you fly, you're subject to a lot of germs, more now, but a lot of germs back then. And I did not get sick. I did perforate my eardrum, but I didn't get sick. And I did order that garlic on the pizza on purpose for all of its benefits. And I'm wondering to this day if that, really did help me out.
Well, it obviously didn't hurt, so that's good. Usually I would combine it with many other things, like have oxalococcinum and elderberry and echinacea and golden seal and a whole plethora of antimicrobials, which I always travel with and, also teach people about. So I
always take chamomile with me, and I did mention that. I did take chamomile tea with me.
Now, chamomile's an interesting one that you brought that up, Cal, because chamomile is one that I would never consider a spice, but it is an herb.
Correct, and in my tea book, I really address that one a lot. It's my tea of choice, and it is an anti-inflammatory. So I guess my combination that helped was the chamomile tea that I drank a lot of because it was frustrating. I wanted to go out and see the northern lights of moose and the snow, and the trip did not provide that for me. They closed down the schools. We were in quarantine because the roads were so icy. It was the warmest day since 1952, if you can believe it, and the winds were just so surreal on the 17th floor, and then, of course, there was an earthquake. It was everything that I didn't plan on. It wasn't my fantasy trip. So come post-pandemic, and this too shall pass, I predict, I am an intuitive, I predict by late fall, I will be going back to Alaska, and we'll start to travel again and have some sense of normalcy.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. We're coming to the end of our discussion, and that was a very fascinating story. And I want to remind our listeners that we are talking to Cal Orey, and she is the author of The Healing Power of Herbs and Spices. Her name is spelled Cal, Calorey, and she also has a website where all her books are featured at calorey.com. And thank you, listeners, for tuning into Herbally Yours, once again produced in the studios or nearby of 90.3 WHPC. Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. We also are on iHeartRadio, and for further information, you can email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamhi at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us again next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.